In my previous 2 videos, I've shown how to create a desktop Blazor application using Photino, and then added Blazor component library. But we haven't done very much with that so far, simply limiting it to a slide-in menu. I now want to extend this project into something that I can use to demonstrate some more Blazor techniques and that might end up being useful. The application I have alighted on is one that can be used by clubs and societies to send out occasional newsletters. There are, of course, plenty of commercial applications that can do this, such as MailChimp, and this is not intended to compete with those. But it will have the advantage that being built in Photino and therefore a desktop application, your membership data will not leave your control, but nevertheless should still be kept under data protection guidelines. It is mid-August 2025 and ChatGPT5 has recently been released. I'd also like to experiment with ChatGPT5 to see if I can write parts of the code where this might otherwise be tedious or repetitive using ChatGPT5. We will need a database to store membership details, and for this I will use SQLite. I have never got to grips with Entity Framework, preferring Dapper as the object relational mapper, and we will do the same in this project. I have also discovered a website that can be used to create HTML for newsletters, amongst other things, called emailbuilder.js, and we will use that for creating the actual newsletters. To send the newsletters, I intend to use MailKit. This is fairly mainstream and is well regarded for this function, and is free. The topics we will therefore cover are SQLite and DB browser, Dapper, Blazor including data grid and dialog and toolbar, emailbuilder.js, MailKit, and we'll see how we get on with ChatGPT5. We'll start with the database. Luckily, it's going to be very simple. I think we will need one table for members and another to hold the information needed to email the newsletters. The design of the members table should be fairly simple. First name, last name, email address, and an include or exclude flag to determine whether a certain member should be included or excluded from the next mailing. The information needed to send emails is from email address, the email address password, from friendly name, the SMTP hostname, and SMTP port number. Normally one might expect to put this in appsettings.json rather than in the database, but I want the application to be easily maintained without the user needing to dive into the guts of the application and amend appsettings.json if they change their email password, for example. It's easy enough to open DB browser and add a database and create these tables, but that's where we're going to give AI the task of creating a script to add the tables. We will add the database manually and call it membership. Now, to lay the groundwork for this, we need to open Visual Studio, and I'll stop the application running. We'll need to create a new folder called Data. This is where I'm going to save the database. Now, we need to right-click that and copy full path. We'll need this when we open DB browser. We now want to create the new database. So we select New Database, and I'll paste in the path that I want in here and go to that folder. And we'll call the database Membership. Save. At this point we could create the tables, but that's where I want to try out AI. So I'll cancel that. And I'll just minimize that. I now need to open the browser and go to ChatGPT. I'll give you the link to this particular page later. So the thing to do is to ask it a question. The question I phrased is this. I'm using SQLite and would like a script to create a table called Members. The data I need to store is listed below, and then I've listed the fields, columns. And that looks fairly straightforward. So I'll copy that, go back into DB browser and open Execute SQL and paste it in here and run it. We'll now go back to ChatGPT and add a new query. This time saying I need another table called Senders with the following data. And that looks fairly good. So we'll copy that, go back to DB browser, I'll get rid of that, and paste the new code in there, the new script, and run it. And looks like we've got our table. We can now close DB browser. We don't want to save the tabs, but we do want to save the database. The next thing we're going to need are model classes. I think we can use the SQL we used to create the tables to ask ChatGPT to create the model classes for the Visual Studio project. And I'm going to be particularly lazy here and ask this question. Using the SQL scripts you gave to create the members and senders tables, please give me the C# code needed to create model classes. And we can see there we've got a bit of it's more complicated than we need. And that's because I didn't tell it that we were going to be using Dapper. So maybe I will change the request by saying, could you repeat, but I'm not using Entity Framework. I think that looks better, but I have noticed one other thing, and that is I haven't told it the name of the application, so it's simply put your app models here as part of the namespace, and we'll have to change that. But that looks pretty good. So let's go back into Visual Studio, and we'll add a new file called member. And I'll copy the code. And actually what I'll do is I'll copy this bit of code. And it's given us a helpful thing here as to how we should treat the include-exclude flag. Now we need one for sender. And I'll get the code for that. And that all looks good. I realized that by copying, as I did just the internal part of the class here, that I've avoided the problem that I'm using PhotinoDemo and I'm saving it in data, whereas ChatGPT assumes that I was going to be saving it in a folder called models. I think that's by luck I simply spotted that. The next thing I want to do is to create services and interfaces. And I expect this to be more challenging. I want C# code for CRUD operations, for insert, update and delete, all for a single record, plus read all records and return as a list/IEnumerable. And lastly, read a specific record identified by its ID. I will be using Dapper, so I will need to state that in the ChatGPT question, and I want the service to be saved in a folder called Services and the interfaces in a folder called Interfaces, both of which should be subfolders of data. So let's ask the question, and this is the question as I've formulated it. Using the models you've suggested for member and sender, could you provide me C# code for corresponding service and interface files called memberservice.cs and senderservice.cs and imemberservice.cs and isenderservice.cs? I would like the service files to be saved in a subfolder of data called services and the interface file in a subfolder of data called interfaces. I'll be using Dapper. This database is a SQLite database called membership.db and is stored in the data folder. The path to the database will be saved in appsettings.json. The services required are as listed below. Let's see how it gets on with that. Again, I've noticed I didn't tell the ChatGPT the name of the application. But on the face of it, that was quite good. Okay, let's get started. So I'm going to copy and paste from here into Visual Studio. So the first thing I want is a subfolder called Interfaces. And another subfolder called Services. And the first file I want is imemberservice. So I'm going to copy the code in from here. And I'm going to avoid this part and use what we've created automatically. And there I've fallen over again. It needs to be PhotinoDemo. I've decided I'm not going to fight this. I'm simply going to re-ask the question, rephrasing it. So I'm now saying, could you repeat this, taking into account the name of the project is PhotinoDemo, and that the services and interfaces files are subfolders of one called data, not models. Right, so this is the iMember service. And it still thinks we're using models, which is a bit annoying. Now I'll do the same for sender service. I'll come back to app settings. And repeat for sender service. Copy all that. And paste that with data. And now change or add the connection strings to app settings.data. Now, a couple of things up here on the services. We'll see that we haven't installed Dapper and we haven't installed Microsoft Data.SQLite. So we ought to do that. So Tools, NuGet Package Manager, we'll install Dapper. And we also needed Microsoft Data SQLite. And install that. And those squiggles have disappeared from there. Going back to here, so that's an interesting question. A service collection extension class, so we can register both service in program.cs with a single line. I'll say yes to that, but I'm not quite sure what we're going to get. Right, well, let's do that then. So I'll copy that and create a new file. And copy the code. And back in program.cs, we need to add this. Using statement at the top. And that line. Let's put it down here. And we'll have to call it App Builder. And that, I think, should have created the basic application. Let's see if it runs. We don't expect anything to happen, but at least it'll tell us if there are any errors. Well, that's pretty good. We've now laid the groundwork for using Blazor controls for CRUD operations. This will be coming next. Providing we find that it all works, the code provided by ChatGPT was an easier, more reliable route than copying and pasting from previous projects. It needs handling with care, and it helps if you know what you want and can specify any restriction and other packages you know you will be using. We've used it for just 2 tables without any complication of foreign keys, but for multiple tables, I think it would save a lot of time. I think that's it for this video. I'll stop here and we'll look at Blazor controls for grids, dialogues and toolbars in the next video. Thank you very much for watching.